Racism is ingrained in our system, and it has taken the death of George Floyd for people to realise this. I feel, as a person of colour, a responsibility to speak out and to acknowledge the suffering and oppression since slavery that has existed and continued to affect people's lives right up to today. My aim for this video is to create lasting change, and I will not stop speaking out until I see this happen. I felt compelled to say something because racism is something that has affected my family and me personally, and it involves real people, real trauma, and real suffering. I believe that people should embrace everyone, regardless of your race, your gender, your sexuality. It should make no difference to how you see someone and how you treat someone as an individual. It's not a fight between blacks and whites. This is a fight on whether you truly believe that everyone should have equal rights and equal opportunities. And if this is something that you do not believe in, then I suggest that you don't watch this video. You will not be able to empathise with anything that we are about to tell you and empathise with any of our personal stories. That has taken courage for us to share with you today. I'm really thankful to Black and white people who have spoken out in the last week about their experiences and wanting to understand what is happening in the world right now. The time for being ignorant is over, and the time for being silent is over. And that is why I'm here today to address the issues that are going on in the world. And I hope that you listen to our stories and you take them on board and you learn from them. And you can grow as a person and continue to grow and want to understand more about the Black community and what we experience on a day-to-day basis. So my name is Chanel Smith, and I am a Year 4 medical student at the University of Bristol. And little man, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Chanel's brother. I'm currently a first year undergraduate at the University of Oxford, and I study French and Spanish.
So today we want to share some of our personal experiences because we feel that a lot of people don't understand racism because it's not something that you can see. And actually a lot of racist experiences that we have experienced are maybe subconscious and invisible to anyone that is not being the receiver of experiences. So MJ, do you want to start? So what are some personal experiences of racism that you have experienced?
I think giving a bit of context just to kind of the schooling, I think we both grew up in an area that is predominantly white, and the schools we went to, there was only a handful of people that were of colour or even black. So although perhaps we've not had overt racism where people are overtly stating that they are white people is somehow superior to black people, we have experienced microaggressions, and which have even continued into university. And I think that while I was at school, obviously sometimes people use racial slurs, and I don't think I have to repeat them now. I think we all know them, but it does have effects on you even subconsciously. And I think before doing this video, sometimes you feel a bit reluctant to speak out because you think that people are going to perceive you differently, as if you shouldn't feel these emotions, and that actually it does affect you subconsciously, and it really is something that I think has to be addressed, and that every person's opinion should be addressed equally as well, because we all have emotions that we all have a right to experience. I was asked by an immigration officer why I was abroad studying, and when I told them what university I was going to in October, they kind of gave me a strange look, and as if I was I was lying and asked if I had any proof for that, as if I would be carrying around my Oxford certificate um, of administration somehow with me everywhere I go. So I think it is prevalent, um, and the only way to address it is to keep fighting with these issues and to not ignore them, because time is not a healer or um, a medium where things happen to grow. It's only through time and action that these two correlate to make change.
Yeah. No, that's so funny that the immigration officer thought you possibly couldn't go to a university like Oxford just because of your colour, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I got stopped in the first place, I think there are about 10 immigration officers waiting. I must have been there then where they're searching my bags for hours, or not hours, but kind of
Yeah,
around
tell
an
us about that. I've not heard this story
hour.
before. Go.
So, yeah, when I came back from, in the same story, when I came back from Peru, on my way back into England, I was stopped, which um, I guess most people with colour has perhaps had an experience with this, kind of just being picked out and isolated. And I think although you'd like to think there might be another reason, or it might just be chance, there is always that feeling inside of you that would I have been chosen if I was white? Um, and I think the fact that I was there all that time, I didn't see anyone. There must have been thousands of people walking through. I didn't see anyone else stopped. Um, it did have an effect on me, I think. I think it does teach you resilience, but I don't think any black person should feel like they have to shoulder a burden of any kind. So it is the reality we face, and they do have a duty to search people. However, the same way police stop and search people that are majority black, it does have effect on people, and people have to realize that their actions have severe consequences on the mental health of these teenagers that they're just somehow randomly plucking off the street just at a whim.
Yeah, that's really powerful, bro. Um, yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I've not heard that story before. Um, yeah, I think the main point to take away with that was racism is almost so deeply ingrained in society that you were clearly judged on your appearance. You know, there's no getting around that. Like there was a reason you were stopped that day, and that was because you looked foreign. You know, you're English. You were born in England. You're raised in England. You don't know any differently. Sure, we have, parents that have an origin of different countries. They were born here too, by the way. So does that make us any less British than anyone else? You know,
I think
it's
I think just on the issue of race, me and my sister are obviously both mixed race. So my mum comes from India and my dad happens to come from Jamaica, and we're living in England. So the issue of identity is something that crops up, and I think a lot of people struggle with. And one thing that is perhaps even more harder to grasp than not feeling like you have a complete home in England is not feeling like you have a complete home in being black or being Indian. And when people somehow say to you that, oh, I don't think you're black enough, or I don't think you're this,
mm,
as if they have a right side what your identity has to be and what you should live up to be, as if by not being incredibly fast, not being a rapper, not being a drug dealer, I am now not black enough, and that I have to listen to a certain type of music to fulfill the stereotype that you want me to be.
yeah, right. You know, I got called a coconut before. Do you know what a coconut is?
I didn't know
Do you know what a
that.
coconut is? It basically means so like I it means so I'm brown facially, but on the inside I'm white. I'm a white girl, which is a fair statement to be fair. But I've grown up in a white school. I've grown up in a white area. I I was the only girl of color, by the way, in my whole year group at secondary school. So just picture that for a second. Um, so of course I'm gonna portray like, white qualities, like maybe speak like white people do, like the same things white people do, because that is what I've grown up with, that is what I know, that is what I am aware of. And then for someone to call me a coconut, like, I never ever heard that word before. And someone called me a coconut. And I was like, I wasn't sure if it was meant to be an offensive thing. Like, I found it quite funny at the time, but like, should I have been angry about that? Because that is such like a crazy term to me. Like,
Yeah, I think
I
it's
don't know how to
interesting.
take
Yeah,
that.
your reaction being laughable is kind of the approach that a lot of people do take, because if you take every comment that you take, every comment that you hear
Yeah.
seriously, it does really hurt. So one way to combat that is to just assume that everyone is joking,
Yeah.
and that in the
I
long
think
term
that's the way
is
I interpreted it. I thought, oh my God, this must be some huge laughable joke, because there's no way they could possibly be serious, you know? That is the problem. I don't think people are nasty when they say this stuff, you know? Um, they people are not racist anymore. Like, they're not openly racist, but you cannot deny that there is unconscious bias there. Like, for the same reason that you cannot deny you were stopped because of the color of your skin. Because your name is Michael Smith. I am sure if you were a white guy, you know, you would not have got stopped. They would not have stopped a white Michael Smith going through the airport, right? So, you know, and when I say this stuff, I'm not blaming anyone. There's no one to pinpoint, because it's not anyone's fault per se, but it's so it's so deeply ingrained in society that it's, often invisible, which is why we're highlighting it today, like why we're talking about it, because we know so many people are not even aware that this is going on. And even if they are aware, you know, I don't think they realize the impact that it has had on us and has had on so many black like people's lives, because it does hurt a lot of the time. Like, a lot of the comments do hurt, and you think about it afterwards, whereas you've probably gone on with your day and didn't care about it and didn't give it a second thought. So I think that's one of the main things I would say when people say, as a white person, what can I do? One of the things I would say is be more sensitive to black people and about your comments and what you've said, because to you, it may have been a joke, and that's fine. But to me, it wasn't. And to my brother, it wasn't. Like, it was real words, real pain, like real suffering. Like, we've remembered these experiences. Do you know what I mean? They're deeply ingrained in our brain because they're linked with emotion. So, you can't like deny the experiences that we've had and deny the trauma that we've had and that we continue to carry through our lives and continue to experience. So, one of the things that I wanted to touch on personally, and something that's actually weighed quite heavily throughout my life growing up, was the fact that I did live in such a white society and that I did look very different to the other girls. It's not common to have parents that are, Indian and Jamaican, which is why I have such a unique look and why I have such unique hair. My secondary school was pretty much as white as they come, and that's not a problem, but it's just how it was. And I was quite young back then. And actually, it's not really something that I did think about, to be honest, because that's all I knew. So I never saw it as a negative thing per se. And it's more in hindsight I've realised how it was affecting me. I would say, first of all, just starting with my hair, it's really sad kind of looking back on it, really, because I used to actually really hate my hair because I had no one else in my school that looked like me. To be honest, even then, I don't think if you went on the internet, you would see many like role models or people that I could look up to that also look like me. Like, I would look at my mom and she would have straight hair, and I would see everyone in my class and everyone like in the assembly hall. I would sit, in rows with everyone, and I would look at everyone's hair and they were all straight. And it made me doubt myself and doubt what I perceived as to be beautiful. And I remember like always growing up and wanting to have straight hair like everyone else. And I used to like put loads and loads of conditioner in and like try and, you know, use like combs and like make it really flat going to school, because all I wanted to do was just like fit in and like look like everyone else, because like I didn't know any better and I didn't have anyone else that looked like me. Obviously, now I felt like very different about myself, and like my hair is actually one of the like my favorite things. Like I love my hair and I would never ever ever change it for anything. And if anything, like it's probably what most people have like commented on and um you know praised me for, that like they just loved my hair. So obviously growing up, you know, it that's kind of how I felt like when I was younger. And I guess as I grew older I became to realize the beauty in my uniqueness and the beauty in my hair. And I since then have like grown in so much more confidence, and I've grown to love myself and appreciate myself so much better. But I just think it was sad growing up. I had to go through, you know, 20 years of, you know, like doubting who I was and like doubting, you know, the way I looked, and not perceiving myself as beautiful because I didn't know anyone who was perceived to be beautiful by society that looked the same as me. Um, so I'd say that was probably actually the biggest challenge I've had growing up. And um, yeah, it's a shame that it's taken this long to get to a place where I can truly love myself. Personally, um, I once had someone come up to me in a nightclub before. I was having a good time, having a good night, and you know, I wasn't even talking to this guy. And he took the time out of his day to come up to me and tell me that black girls are really boring to look at. And I was just shocked, first of all. Like I was just like dumbstruck. I just stood there and like I didn't know what to do or like what to say. Like I wasn't even angry. I was just shocked, like why someone would even first of all take the time out of their day to come and tell me what they thought of me. Two, how dare they even, you know, categorize black girls as a thing and just categorically say that they're all boring to look at. What kind of message or statement is that? Most painful experience actually of direct like racial abuse, because that is what it was. Like if it was direct racial abuse directed at me to my face by someone I didn't know, just out of the blue. And I was so hurt by that statement. Like I literally broke down. Like I left the club. I like had a complete like just breakdown, and I was with some of my friends, and we just went straight home, and like I just went straight to bed. Like I couldn't talk to anyone. Like I couldn't think about anything else. Like it was just like weighing on like my head and like my heart like really heavily. And like I even like woke up the next day like still thinking about the words that he was saying, and still up to this day like still think about what he said. Like the words were so hurtful. It was like a dagger. And the crazy thing was, it's like I was beating up myself because I was like, why am I upset? Because ultimately this guy has no value in my life. Like ultimately I don't care about his opinion, you know? Like I'm a strong woman. Like I can handle an offensive comment from time to time. I can handle if you don't think I'm attractive, whatever. But I think I was so shocked, and it was clearly so racially directed. And I think it doesn't matter how many times these things happen to you, you're still shocked every single time. And he's probably gone home and like, you know, chilled out. And yet here I am, you know, feeling stupid for being this upset about something that doesn't matter, but really hurt, like truly, really hurt me.
I, I just wanted to pick up on the type of words he was using. I think a lot of people nowadays struggle with the concept of the Eurocentric views of beauty and what that means. And when whenever this guy is describing my sister as boring, it really reflects a lot of concerns about from people of color about how people view just black people, South Asian people as just exotic and like culture and just something which people kind of get bored of after they've seen once or twice. And I think this is really harmful for the people you're speaking to, and it's just the concept in general. Um, I mean, I've read some few things I've seen that have happened in Oxford recently. People just talking about their experiences. I think this is a really pertinent point. And I mean, I can tell this has really hurt my sister, and it's just really horrible to see, and it's just not needed as well.
Mm.
And I think that's just the worst part is the fact
Yeah,
that someone
he could have
felt the
just not
need
talked to me, actually.
to actually tell her that
Yeah.
it's not a thought that just came to his mind. He had to physically vocalize it to get his point across, and that is what is even more sickening.
I think it was the choice of word, boring. I would actually rather he had told me I was ugly
I
or
think there's just
something nasty, actually would have been better to hear. At least then I wouldn't. Boring is almost worse than ugly. At least if you're ugly, there's some sort of, you feel a certain way about me. It was the boringness, the fact that maybe I'm just like invisible, because I think invisibility, especially maybe as a woman of color, is a big issue. And one, as a girl, you can feel, maybe you're not taken seriously, but then as a woman of color, actually, it's not that people are nasty to you, it's maybe that you are not seen as someone worthy of someone's time, or you're not worthy of someone's friendship because you're just viewed as less. And I would say that sometimes I have felt like maybe my opinions weren't valued or my voice wasn't listened to because I was actually just not taken seriously. And I know that a lot of people, when I say this, will relate to it because they have felt the same invisibility and the same not being enough. Yeah, and that's something even harder to address because you can't point someone out for not addressing you. At least if they're horrible to you, you can say something or you can fight back. But actually, if someone just doesn't even acknowledge your existence, and if someone looks at every single person in the room apart from you, you're the only one that suffered out of that encounter with that person, because everyone else feels included and everyone else feels happy and free to go about the day, but you were sat there feeling like you didn't matter, and that's a really horrible feeling. The accumulation of these comments and taking the unconscious toll that it takes on you. What would you say to people at your university and who make jokes and brush it off? What would you say to them? Because I think the main problem sometimes that people have is they don't see the effect that it has on you, because for them it was a joke. For them, they weren't taking it seriously. For them, they won't think about it the rest of the day. But you're going to take on that burden. You taken on, that hurt because it did hurt. Like, those words do hurt, don't they? And I think that's the biggest problem. So what would you say to people about your university and anyone that sometimes makes racist jokes, probably without thinking and probably without realizing the impact that it's having on, black communities and their mental health?
I think that especially now people seem to be trying to gather a bigger awareness of these issues and educate themselves, and that's very important. I think from my perspective, I haven't been at university that long, and if I was to be truly honest, then I have felt warmly accepted into university life, and especially in Oxford, all of this stigma surrounding being a white only space due to its kind of its past, which is obviously rooted in aspects of slavery, which is unavoidable from like visible aspects around the university. I think that is important to show that Oxford is also a space where black people are welcomed, and I personally haven't really experienced much like racism at all, and even unconsciously. But I am also aware that there are people that do, and this is a problem that does need to be addressed. The fact that we've had these news articles recently about porters thinking that black students are not part of the university and not letting them inside, and somehow people assuming that just because someone's black that they couldn't possibly go to the university. Um, I think I've experienced that as well before I even came to Oxford. I think looking at history from when slavery was first abolished in the South, I think when we look at America, we like to split it up into two distinct sections. Given that the Civil War was between the North and South, we like to think that the North were the freedom fighters, and whilst it was very important when slavery was abolished, this was by no means the end of it. And I think that the subjugations of our minds within slavery still has resonance today. Um, and despite the calls for like abolition from the North, when they realized that now these released black slaves are coming up to the North from the South, we then saw this racist sentiment, something I think that still resonates today in the rhetoric that's used about immigrants coming and stealing our jobs. It's something that still hasn't left the vocabulary 200 years later. And I think some of the most insidious forms of racism are when you can't see the enemy. At least if someone tells you, you know what you're up against, you know what you're trying to fight against. When someone claims not to be racist and then their actions, their words, their day-to-day life contradicts it, it's hard to stomach and hard to reason to with, because you have no basis, you have no point at which you can reason an argument against, because they still believe that they're on your side. And then it becomes much more complicated, and you feel like you're kind of trying to run through quicksand because you're always just putting in more effort, but you're only sinking further into the ground.
So racism is obviously a problem that's bigger than my brother and it's bigger than me. And we have various stories from both my parents that have also experienced racial abuse. So we wanted to take the opportunity to use this platform to share their stories as well. And I think let's start with my dad, because he is a black Jamaican guy. So he was born and raised in the UK, but he has a Jamaican origin, and he doesn't look like he's from here per se. But it's crazy that, you know, if he was white, he wouldn't have faced a lot of the struggles that he did growing up. Like when he was younger, he used to have to get the bus to school, like numerous occasions where he was chased down the street by white gangs, threatening to kill him, threatening to like beat him up. He had to basically, you know, fight to survive like every single day of his life, and all he wanted to do was just go to school. And it's a shame that he had to go through that turmoil pretty much every day, like just to get to school, which is crazy.
I mean, I think it shows. I think this stuff is probably less common now, and it does show that we have maybe improved somehow, but this stuff does still happen. Innocent people get attacked for no reason besides the fact that someone doesn't like the color of their skin. And I mean, reading about it is hard to take, and then hearing it from your father's mouth is kind of even more distressing, and it makes you. I don't think I should ever have to feel lucky that I don't get attacked walking down the street,
Right.
but for some weird reason I do, and that is just the reality of the world that we live in. It's not a safe place 100% of the time, and this kind of things do happen. And I mean, I don't think I have any words to try and explain it, because there is no justification. There's no logic. There's no reasoning. Um, Besides just pure, it's beyond ignorance for me. I think ignorance perhaps implies that you're unaware of something, or that somehow with education that you might be able to change your mind. But I think at that point, when you resort to such hatred and violence over nothing, I think we've almost gone past the point of no return, and I think that's the most disillusioning thing for me. Um, I think especially with when people are murdered, and it makes you think whether long-lasting change can ever happen, and do I believe that necessarily that there'll be a time in the world where no one is racist? Probably not. But if we create a world which is intolerant to this vile behavior, maybe people will think twice about doing it. And even though deep down they might harbor these views, eventually the number of people that feel this way might go down. But I think especially in this time of hysteria, we have to realize that this isn't an overnight fix. No amount of petitions or donations can pay or change that. And I think the mind can be as stubborn as anything, or anything on this earth. So we do really have to try and fix this. And I think it's also worth saying that this didn't end in my father's childhood. He's experienced it now. He's experienced the aftermath of apartheid South Africa while he was working. I think the both of us will never forget the first time my dad told us the story of walking into a bar.
Oh yeah, can I say the story? Well, I don't love the story, but it's so mind-blowing. It's almost like something you would see in a movie that you think can't possibly be real. So like I will just never forget the story that my dad told me. So this was 20 years ago. So people are so quick to say how racism has improved. And yeah, so maybe it's not in our faces as much, but back then, like, let me tell you, the apartheid had not long been lifted, and South Africa was very openly racist. And that's something that no one can deny. And I know because my dad used to live there and used to work there. And in fact, I was born there. This is nothing against South Africa as a country. That is just how it was back then. My dad went to a bar with a couple of his mates, and when they walked into the bar, my dad asked for a beer, and the barman kind of, looked at him funny and said, yeah, and then get out, very sharply, like very aggressive. And after that they thought, maybe it's not a good idea to stay here, so they left. And as they walked out, they realized why the man maybe was so aggressive to them, and it's because they had a little plaque outside of their bar, and the plaque said, no dogs, no cats, no blacks. So basically, my dad was not viewed as any more than an animal. He was not worthy to sit in the same bar as a white man. They did not view him as a human being, pretty much is what they're saying by that statement. And that was not a unique experience for my dad, sadly. but one that has stuck out to both me and my brother, just because of our shock of that could have possibly happened to like our dad. And I just want you to just picture that happening to your dad, like, to try and understand what that feels like as a child, to hear these stories from your parents. Like, it is really heartbreaking to know that this has happened.
I think when we talk about comparing black people to some sort of animals, I think I spoke about progress just a minute ago, but it does make you contextualize how black people have been perceived throughout human history. When the first Europeans discovered the New World, black people was portrayed as savage animals, while the Europeans unleashed gunpowder on them. And I think this hypocrisy and irony is still prevalent and visible today. And I think when we read this, we can somehow detach ourselves and think that we're not those same people that were colonizing and conquering the New World 500 years ago. And yet, reading those plaques, seeing people make monkey noises at black people walking down the street, these are the same kind of people that existed 500 years ago and still share the same attitudes in the present day. And so when we think about progress, how much has really changed in human nature over all of this time? We may have this swanky new technology, but yet our core values have never really swayed further from what we used to be when we first came to existence.
Yeah, that is really poignant, the way that you said that. And I do often feel like things change, but nothing really changes. I think also the fact how my dad grew up, to me in particular, is because my family actually knew Stephen Lawrence. So I'm sure you guys remember how Stephen Lawrence was murdered at a bus stop by a group of white gangs. And my mum knew him personally, worked with him for years, and told us stories of all the times that they used to work together. And when he was murdered the way he was, like, she was really shocked and really heartbroken, because that was a friend of hers, a colleague of hers. And the only way I can compare it is to, if someone was to die, one of your classmates, if you heard, tomorrow that one of them had been brutally murdered, how you would feel about that, and what kind of trauma you would experience if that happened to one of your best mates. And it just hits home that, like, these are like real people, and these are not just names that you hear on the news. Like, real lives are being lost, and it's not just one life that it's affected. It's their friends, their families. So it has a huge implication on so many people's lives, not just the one person that was murdered. And we can see how George Floyd's death has caused such an outcry, which is because people can relate to it, because people see their son lying there, they see their brothers lying there, they see their fathers lying there, that could have been their family, that could have been their friend. I think we'll leave it there, and I think we'll sum it up, because we've talked about a lot today, and it was, what we're saying is quite deep, and it is quite heavy on the heart, and it's difficult to listen to, and it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's a conversation that needed to be had, because people will still deny that racism exists. They still deny that the system is fundamentally broken, that it oppresses anyone and treats anyone less than anyone else. And I urge you, next time when you doubt that racism exists, and you doubt that the system is not broken, that you remember the stories that we told you, you remember the suffering that your black colleagues and your black friends have suffered, because I guarantee you that if you asked every single one of them, I know that they would have at least one story to tell you where they have experienced some form of prejudice or some form of discrimination. Because let me tell you that it does happen to every single one of us at some point of their lives. And it's a sad truth, but I'm glad that that me and my brother are here today to discuss it, and I feel glad that I have this platform to speak up and make my voice be heard, because it is such an important issue to speak about, and by talking about it, we can try and move forward, and we can try and create change. And I do hope that maybe not in my lifetime, but I hope that maybe one day there will be a time where everyone is treated equally and everyone is viewed the same. But until then, we will continue to talk about these issues.
I think I'd just like to conclude by just saying, if you've got this far, then just thank you for listening, because if you're listening now, then you've decided that you could learn from other people's experiences, and I think that's a very important step into achieving the ultimate outcome of true equality. And perhaps if this is something that you might not have heard before or read much about, that you're slowly gaining a better picture. But I think that doesn't end with our experiences, and I think as we keep going over like the next weeks and months, when perhaps the riots die down, that you continue in your own way to just improve yourself by learning, because I'm sure that I'll be doing exactly the same, because I've still got a lot to learn. I'm still pretty young in the grand scheme of things, and I am no means an expert on race, despite being a coloured person. I think we've all got something that we can learn, and someone that we can listen to, and that's the best thing about learning, is that it's non-stop. You can never be fully educated or fully aware about one particular topic. There's always something more that you can learn, and I think that although this has been quite a downbeat, a pessimistic video, it doesn't have to be this way for eternity. And while we're learning, I think I just like to highlight that black culture isn't just slavery and racism and imperialism. We are inspiring people with inspiring stories and a rich culture which deserves to be explored. Africa is one of the most vibrant and colourful places that I've ever had the pleasure of going to. So while you're learning, I think if you really want to reach the heart of other people, then learning about what really makes them tick, what their culture is really about, is another very important thing in order to achieve this.